Hello, and welcome to Innovation Lab, your go-to resource for all things biotech startups. Brought to you today by the National Cancer Institute's Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR, Development Center. Our podcast hosts interviews with successful entrepreneurs and provides resources for small businesses looking to take their cutting-edge cancer solutions from lab to market. I'm Monique Pond, a program director and team lead here at NCI-SBIR, and I'll be today's host. In this episode, I'm joined by fellow podcast host and program director, Dr. Billy Baza, to compare the two main funding mechanisms entrepreneurs can apply for, grants and contracts. As we dive into these funding mechanisms, you'll learn about the unique requirements of each and hopefully gain a sense of which one might be more appropriate for your technology. Welcome, Billy, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Monique. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Excited to be on the other side of the podcast for a change.
All right. Well, to start us off, at a high level, how would you describe contracts versus grants to our listeners that maybe aren't familiar with these funding opportunities?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different unique administrative differences, but I think for the general benefit of our audience, we should highlight on the differences that will kind of influence which funding mechanism they choose to pursue. And that's really going to boil down to the technology that the innovators are developing. So both mechanisms, grants and contracts, provide non-dilutive early stage seed funding to U.S. small businesses for R&D towards translation of a commercial product. And in both cases, the company retains all of their intellectual property. So the large majority of things that we fund in our office is on the grant sides. In terms of a portfolio breakdown, it's about 80% of our awards are for grants and 20% are for contracts. And on the grant side, primarily we'll refer to through the omnibus mechanism, the scope of the proposed technological solution is investigator driven. So really anything that touches a cancer patient or provider is something we would consider funding through the omnibus grant mechanism. And the small business concerns can really identify and choose what that unmet medical need is and proposed solution is as well. Now, on the flip side, our office leverages contracts to highlight high priority NCI interest areas. So every year we do a contract topic call to solicit good ideas from all of our different divisions within NCI. So the guidance I typically provide is if your technology that you're developing naturally addresses and fits into one of these contract topics, go ahead and apply through that contract mechanism. And if it doesn't, then really kind of investigate and focus in on the omnibus grant mechanism. The other major difference I thought I would kind of highlight up front is how much involvement NCI performs in the funding mechanism. So for grants, the NCI involvement is really quite minimal, especially on the programmatic side. However, on the contracts, it's significantly more involved. We'll talk about some of these details probably later, as I'm sure there's questions related to them, but there's an initial negotiation process where NCI can kind of weigh in and potentially revise and modify the statement of work a bit. So there's the general thing to just be aware of is there's significantly more involvement from NCI on the contract side.
So if someone's listening in today and has an idea, it sounds like they want to propose their own scope of work. Then they would go through the grant mechanism. You mentioned the omnibus. If they are looking at their technology and it fits within a contract topic where NCI has defined the deliverables, then it sounds like contract topic or mechanism is the way that you would suggest going.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So now that we have kind of the basics down, let's talk about money a little bit. So when a company is looking for funding either through grants or contracts, is there a difference in the size of the types of opportunities available to them? Would that be something that might change their decision one way or the other?
So in terms of funding size, there's a lot of overlap. There's some subtle differences I'll speak to, but in general, for phase one awards, and when I say phase, we refer to SBIR phases, not clinical phases. So both grants and contracts utilize phase one awards. They're $400,000 awards for one-year projects, typically focusing on proof of concept validation. Both grants and contracts utilize phase two awards. Our dollar amount at NCI has recently increased for phase two awards. They're $2.25 million. They're typically 2-year projects. They're for later stage research and development. On the grant side, there's always an option under Omnibus to submit a fast track and direct to phase two under the SBIR mechanism. And contracts, usually it depends on the contract topic. So you'll have to check the solicitation and see that sometimes it varies depending on the contract topic. And when we say a fast track application, that means a single application where there's both a phase one and phase two component, together. And contracts, the kind of nice thing for fast tracks is you can submit a phase one proposal only and a phase one and phase two proposal together as well. And each of those get scored independently. So you have the option to kind of see how peer reviewers see about both of those options, just the phase one portion or the whole fast track combined. The other thing to note that's different if you have a contract and a phase one award and you're able to successfully execute those aims or objectives, you'll receive an invitation to transition to phase two to submit a separate proposal that undergoes a separate second peer review for a phase two option as well. So that's something different that doesn't happen on the grant side.
So thinking about peer review, is it the same peer review panels if someone applies through the omnibus grant mechanism versus the contract mechanism, or are the panels themselves different?
Yeah, so the panels are different. In terms of peer review as a whole, there's a lot of similarity, right? At the end of the day, these mechanisms and the peer review staff, they're looking for innovation, unmet medical need, existence of a commercial market. They're looking at the team and the resources that have been put together to tackle this project. Where the peer review is housed, though, is different. On the grant side, that's housed at the NIH level within the Center for Scientific Review. And for contracts, they're housed, the peer reviews are organized and housed at the institute level for NCI within the Division of Extramural Activities. Some of the things they score, though, are quite similar. So for contracts, peer reviewers are scoring on technical merit, innovation, commercial application, personnel, and research environment. For grants, they're scoring on significance, innovation, approach, investigators, and environment. A lot of overlap there. One thing we can highlight is commercial application is specifically scored for contracts. As for grants, that's kind of just built into all the different individual criterion scores where there's not something specifically carved out for commercial application. Other scoring things that we can kind of note is there's numerical scoring for both contracts and grants. The lower the number, the better for grants. So a good grant would typically score in the 20s. For contracts, the higher the score, the better. So if a contract scores in the 80s, that's generally considered pretty strong score.
One thing I like to uh, mention to companies when I speak with them, if they're trying to decide or between the two mechanisms or learn more about how to put together the proposals, who's going to be reading them and such. I think it's helpful to keep in mind that the grants mechanism, some of those study panels can be a bit broad scientifically. So something to consider when you're writing your application versus the panels that are put together by DEA for contracts and a specific contract topic. Those typically have people on the review panel with a little bit more focused scientific background in that specific area. So sometimes the writing can be a little bit different for if you're doing a grant application versus a contract proposal.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so once a company is hopefully been successful and been awarded either a grant or contract, I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but let's discuss a little bit more about the reporting that they do
Mhm.
once they've received their award.
Yeah, for sure. So for grants, there's less reporting. It's done annually, and at the end or conclusion of the project, companies can submit that information using ERA comments. And for contracts, there's a lot more involvement. There's an initial kickoff meeting, there's quarterly reporting, there's a final report and a final presentation. Deliverables are submitted for all of those and typically by email.
Yeah, that's a good point about contracts where the presentations are required both at the beginning and the end of the award period. We'll say, at the NCISBR Development Center, we do try to, once a company receives an award on the grant side, we try to keep companies matched with the same program director, just so both sides can kind of get to know each other a little bit better. Program directors can get to know the company and technology and team, and hopefully that's beneficial to the company along the way. So I know sometimes there will be some informal presentations on the grant side aren't necessarily required, but something that I find certainly helpful. And it's just so we can get to hopefully know the technology a bit better and provide some resources and guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. If an issue comes up or there's a little bit of a delay or a slight pivot, it's always good to reach out to the program director, get their take and their guidance on what the best path forward is. Another thing we can mention here, since we're talking about deliverables, is the payment structure. So that's a little bit
Mhm.
different between grants and contracts. So for grants, for the full budget period year is awarded upfront into the company's PMS account, and then they draw down from funds as they incur expenses related towards the project. And so that's different from contracts. So we talked about multiple deliverables and quarterly deliverables, and there's an invoice that needs to be submitted and that's associated with that. So companies submit an initial invoice when they have their open and kickoff meeting, and then when they submit their quarterly deliverables. So that's one other important distinction between grants and contracts.
So for our listeners today, if they have questions about contract or grant opportunities, can they get in touch with you or I, or is there a different process that they should look into for each mechanism?
The ability of our office to interact with stakeholders is pretty direct and open for grants. It's a little bit more guarded for contracts. So the guidance for grants, if you already have an assigned program director, that's your point of contact, reach out to them. If you're getting ready to apply and you don't have an assigned program director, I'd encourage you to check out our webpage, as Monique mentioned, sbir.cancer.gov, and check out our contact and staff page. You can see all of our different program directors with their different subject matter expertise. Find someone that aligns with your technology, reach out to them, and we're happy to set up a call. That's the best way to kind of communicate on the grant side to make sure you're looking at the right funding mechanisms and you have kind of the right information ready for your application. On the contract side, because of federal contracting law, everything has to be kind of conducted in a fair and open environment. And for that reason, all questions for contracts have to go through the Federal Contracting Office at ncioaspir@mail.nih.gov. And depending if the question is of a scientific or programmatic nature, they'll route that question to a program director for an answer.
Okay, that's good to know for contracts, a little bit different than reaching out to our usual mail NCISBI mailbox. Let's talk about how often these opportunities come up. How many receipt dates for contracts versus for the grant side?
Yep, on the grant side, particularly for the omnibus, there's 3 standard receipt dates throughout the year: January, April, September 5th. Unless that falls on a weekend or holiday, then it's the next business day. For contracts, there's an annual solicitation, usually comes out every year in the summer with the receipt date in later fall.
Okay, great. And what if somebody is interested in applying to both mechanisms? Could they put in an application under, let's say the grant omnibus as well as the contract mechanism at the same time?
So for NIH policy, there can't be the same work under peer review, 2 different peer review mechanisms at the same time. So you would have to kind of stagger, or if there's a second technology or the same technology, a different indication, then you could potentially have, both submissions and proposals under peer review at the same time.
Yeah, I advise people sometimes if they're interested in contracts to think about, they can apply for the contract, see how it goes, hopefully they're successful. But if not, it is a different template for grants, but they could, reuse a lot of the same information and then, apply through the grant mechanism. As you mentioned, I think that's a great point. Not at the same time, but, for the next grant cycle. So something to keep in mind that it can you can have more than one shot or try both avenues if you want.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good strategy. It's for sure is a competitive program. So sometimes it takes a couple submissions to really get, the best idea expressed in a way that leads to a good funding chance success.
Thanks, Billy, for taking time to speak with our audience today.
Thanks, Monique. Thanks so much for having me. It was really great.
2 different funding mechanisms out there for our listeners if you're a biotech entrepreneur or looking to get started as an entrepreneur. And while we've covered a lot of the basics of contracts and grants here today, we encourage you to learn more about them by signing up for our mailing list or checking our website and attending associated webinars. As always, don't forget to check our website, sbir.cancer.gov, for the latest funding opportunities and commercialization resources to support your journey from lab to market. This was Monique Pond from NCI SBIR. Please join us again for the next installment of NCI SBIR Innovation Lab and subscribe today wherever you listen. If you have questions about cancer or comments about this podcast, you can email us at ncinfo@nih.gov or call us at 800-422-6237. And please be sure to mention Innovation Lab in your query. We are a production of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute. Thanks for listening, everyone.